Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an institute for the humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. Today, we're being joined by Professor Mark Bauerlein, author of several books, including one that will take our attention today, The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, a sequel to a similarly titled book that he wrote. And we'll get the rundown on both of those texts in our time ahead. Before Dr. Bauerlein introduces himself, we get into our main subject here. I would encourage everyone, especially in high school and college age, to take a look here at Apocatastasis at our project, as we call it, which is our synchronized teaching of the humanities in a unified curricula using stable texts over several years. And we're putting this together with poetry in coordination with history, literature, philosophy. It's a tremendous project coordinating all these readings. But we have been doing daily broadcasts to get a flavor for things, and people can check that out and perhaps consider enrolling come autumn in this truly unique look at all of human history, but particularly Western history and Western letters. So we have a subpage for that, and that will be down below, as well as Dr. Bauerlein's websites. Here's his Twitter, you can see in the bubble, and any other websites that are appropriate, I will put in the description as well. So with all of that, Professor, welcome, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, and thank you for doing what you do. You know, the humanities are not doing well in higher education. We see enrollments and majors in English, the foreign languages, history, philosophy, going down steadily, down and down, to the point where you can pretty much go through a college, university, and have very little humanities exposure at all, and still graduate. About the only required course now is freshman comp and in the humanities. And the freshman comp class is usually often about social issues. You read op-eds. You don't read the odes of John Keats. And I think what we're finding is the humanities are being kept alive with off-campus units, or if they're on campus, they're outside the standard humanities departments. So you could be like the Benedictine monks, 1,000 years ago, keeping it alive. So thank you for doing that. I was an English professor at Emory University for 30 years. I just retired a few years ago. I do a lot of work though on K-12 standards, English language arts standards as well, and advising states on curriculum matters. I'm a trustee at New College of Florida, which has gotten a lot of press in the last couple of years, trying to bring that campus more toward a more classical model of liberal education. I think we've succeeded in doing that. And I'm an editor at First Things magazine, where I've been since 2014, editing and writing articles and whatnot. So that's my profile. I got interested in the digital advent about 20, maybe even a little longer, 20 years ago, when I found English majors diminishing, the numbers going down. And then I was at the National Endowment for the Arts, and we did a report on the decline of literary reading in America, especially among young people. And the obvious factor was the rise of that screen, right? Kids were leaving books and they were heading over toward the screen, right? The video games, social media was just starting. MySpace was 2002, 2001. Facebook exploded, really. I mean, it was invented earlier, but exploded in 2006. Twitter came along in 2008. And then the iPhone and the texting and everything else, Instagram, TikTok, all of that simply pulled young people's eyes away from the books. And this was a terrible problem. But at that time, I mean, maybe you even are too young to remember this. 25 years ago, there were all these cheerleaders for the web. Wired magazine and intellectuals and a lot of academics saying, this is fantastic. Kids are doing amazing things with Wikipedia. They're reading and writing more words than ever before. They're going to be the most informed, tolerant, worldly, cosmopolitan, literate generation in all of human history. That's where we are. And we're not going to call them Gen Y, which is what they were supposed to be called after Gen X and now Gen Z. We're going to call them by the grandiloquent name millennials. They were going to lead America into the 21st century. And boomers like me, I'm a late boomer, we're too grooved in our habits. We're stuck in that old linear, slow reading mode of print. And this is a whole new world that the young are adept. They're the early adopters, as they were called, the digital natives. They have no living memory of a time without the PC. And so they've actually got a great advantage in this world, a great advantage over people like me. We have a situation in which the young were changing their habits. They were seduced by the screens. And then a lot of my colleagues, a lot of intellectuals were saying, this is wonderful. And I and a few others just said, no, this is actually horrible. It's horrible for a 15-year-old to walk around with 250 photos of himself in his pocket. It's actually horrible for that kid to have a Facebook page and just unfriend any voice that I don't like. The world is my oyster, or at least it should be. And they grow up with this kind of expectation because the web enabled them. If you're on Facebook, you never ever have to be alone, John. You can always find an escape from loneliness. Well, that's actually not a healthy thing either. Being alone is something you must spend time doing, and you must learn to be alone. That's part of maturity. But all these tools were invitations to adolescent narcissism, and with the screen, with all the social media, with the web stuff, you don't have to read the great stories, the great myths, the great events in human history. It's all you. It's all about you. And that works when you're 17. And I wrote the first Dumbest Generation book talking about them as 15, 16, 17-year-olds. John, it doesn't work when you're 33. Building your big Facebook page, the thrill is gone. You've got bills to pay. You've got a job you got to go to, and the blandishments of all the social media just don't cut it anymore. And so I wrote this follow-up book. How are those millennials doing now that they're 33 years old? And the fact is that you know about this, you've heard of this, the emotional and social measures are all down. Narcissism is up, but we got to remember, narcissism is an unhappy condition. Remember what happened to Narcissus. Also, depression is up, anxiety is up. I mean, the number of kids, a lot of them high achiever kids on medication is distressing. Social mistrust is very high. They don't feel good about their neighbors. They wonder about whether those people are any good or not. They have a lot of pessimism about the future, which you can see in the fact that they're not getting married and having kids at nearly the rate that people used to. A lot of people blame this on hard economics, but in the Depression, people still had a lot of kids. I don't buy that argument very much. So the situation is this, and this is what I argue in this new book, that when young people were so immersed in the digital And we're talking about 6 hours a day when they're 13, 14, 15 years old. They had a lot of leisure time. They weren't doing a lot of homework. In fact, when they went to college, they weren't doing a lot of work in college. In fact, homework is way down while grades are up. They did not get the moral, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual seasoning that would enable them to manage the inevitable disappointments of adulthood. They don't go to church. Most of them don't really believe in God in any concrete way. They don't feel that great about their country. Not a lot of devotion to the United States, not a lot of gratitude for living in this place. A lot of them are from broken families, dysfunctional home lives. And so without that, without God, country, family, I've got my screen. And I'll add to that, I don't have a reservoir of great art, beauty, literature, myth. They don't have those powerful identifications that a lot more people used to have. Young guys growing up and reading Hemingway. Girls reading Victorian novels and Jane Austen. And that there was a lot of moral instruction that went on in those books, and not even necessarily classics all the time. Just reading books, identifying with characters. One of the things that reading fiction does is build cognitive empathy, right? Cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy is not sympathy. Cognitive empathy is being able to imagine what is going on in someone else's head, to investigate motive, to consider why someone is saying or doing something, even a villain, right? This is one reason why it's important to read works with villains who are kind of complicated. Figures who do bad things, but you get rationales. You begin to understand, again, more deeply the grays of human behavior. It's not all, you're racist, you're sexist. No, those are stupid statements. I mean, I mean it. Those are signs of an incapacity to understand human nature, and they're so easy as well. But if you read works of, Paradise Lost has Satan. Satan has moments of reflection that are one of the reasons why Paradise Lost is one of the monuments of Western civilization. Satan's there in the Garden of Eden. He wants to ruin these little creatures God has created and loved, Adam and Eve. And he spies Eve. She's beautiful. And he pauses for a moment and sort of thinks, why am I doing this? What am I doing this for? And it is, again, deep psychological reflection. You learn things. You think about things. St. Augustine in that orchard, the pears. Why does he join with all the guys and despoil that fruit farmer's harvest one night? And he goes on for pages. It's a startling rumination on peer pressure, youth peer pressure. It's worth reading. So all these things, Emily Dickinson's little lyrics on solitude, right, and her own existence. Again, it just deepens you about life, about humanity, about right and wrong, and truth and falsehood. So added to that, they didn't get the shadow of the tradition, right, in their lives. It helps you to weather a breakup. I loved her so much. I wanted to marry. I want to spend the rest of my life with her. And she dumped me. And I just feel dead inside. Well, you read stories of love and loss it helps. It just gives you sort of a frame of reference for what's going on with you. We didn't give them that either. No humanities tradition in their heads. And now, where are they? As I described it, they're not happy. And they don't really, worse, they don't really know what to do with that unhappiness. Where do I put it? Politics, Do I identify with victims of these victims, that victims? They're not really me, but I can identify with them and sort of work out my own despair and anger, resentment through these political causes. Or, all right, do I climate change? I have visions of the end of the world happening within a few years. I think these are places to put that free-floating unease, the dismay that they have, that their lives are not blossoming the way Mark Zuckerberg's life did. I look at those Facebook pages, those people seem so happy and so fulfilled, and I'm not. Why? The world isn't right. Hey, look, go read about, the Garden of Eden, right? They had everything, paradise, and they blew it. They lost paradise. Paradise doesn't exist on planet Earth. You're going to live and you're going to die. These are, again, the realities that teenage screen shielded them from, and it damaged them.
Great. Thank you for that, Dr. Bauerlein. And just on the tech for the audience and for yourself, if there's a slight delay, it's just because I mute when you're speaking there, just for the sake of reverb. And then also by way of tech, if I happen to drop out here, because sometimes this computer just shuts down, I will be back. So just carry on and I'll be back soon enough. But yeah, wow, so much to get into there. First of all, just by the by, First Things, was that Father Newhouse's publication?
Correct. I lived in Father Newhouse's old apartment from 2014 to 2017. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow,
Yeah.
Lord of mercy on him. He must be dead how many years now? A decade, I guess.
Was it might have been 2009? It's been a while. Rusty Reno has been editor for about 12, 13 years now.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Now, to our main point here, the topic, as I was reading through your book, first of all, I get the reference to, the optimism at the beginning of this century. I have some books back here that are proof of that. The MOOCs, remember the MOOCs, the massive online, and all the optimism about that. And also, by way of just old-timey references, I got the Rocky and Bullwinkle reference even early on in your book, and I do remember MySpace. But also, just to second a reference in your book, and I think you alluded to it in your rejoinder just now, Dr. Bauerlein, and that is Marianne Wolf's book, Reader, Come Home. That is an excellent text in terms of just the cognitive and the emotional benefits of reading. And I would really recommend people who want to get into this topic and what these screens are doing to us, and alternatives like picking up a book. And in your text, Dr. Bauerlein, and also in hers, something that struck me is that aspect of religious faith that comes up a lot here. And repeatedly in your text, you point this out: the rise of the nuns, and that's NONES. And could you just describe for us, what are these nuns? They're not with the habit. What are these nuns you speak of, and the demographers speak of?
The nuns are not atheists, but they are people who don't belong to any organized religion, and they don't attend church in any regular fashion. The nun really means that they are not allied with any church institution. They just sort of feel, well, maybe God is out there, and maybe there's a good thing there, but there's no actual carry through. They don't pray on any regular basis. And I think that this is a sorry condition I speak to religious groups sometimes, a lot of youth, and I said, you're so lucky. You can go to bed at night, you can go to your room at night, and you can spend 10 minutes in prayer, just repeating Our Father, if you're a Christian, and the other prayers. You've got this moment where you go out of the world, and you are trying to address it's just me, I and the Father. 3 times in the Gospels, Jesus goes off by himself. Got to get away. Okay, he understands the value of solitude, periodic solitude. Now he's with the Father at those moments, but he's not with other people. And the lesson there is that spiritually, you must get away from the world. You must get away from society and practice that address to some transcendent orientation. This is a healthy thing to do. It's emotionally and spiritually healthy. So the nuns don't have that. And it's hard when you can't take your sufferings to a higher order of existence. Prayer, I mean, scientists, psychologists will talk about the benefits of prayer. Even those who are atheists, they do note the improvements that take place in people if they can pray. So the nuns don't have that, and I think it leaves them spiritually adrift. They might talk about, religion is oppressive, and any church is oppressive. And I want to say, well, you could look at it that way, or you could look at the church giving some structure to your life and some clarity to your beliefs. I mean, my colleagues in academia, if they were to say to me, well, why do you think that? I would say, well, that's what my church tells me. That's sort of an inconceivable posture for an intellectual or an academic. You're supposed to be a free and independent mind. I said, who am I? I'm a very small creature. I'm an atom in the whole of existence. The Catholic Church has been around for 2,000 years, and a whole lot smarter people than me put together the catechism of the Catholic Church. So I have no problem acknowledging my fallibility and my willingness to let something else guide my thinking about things. So I think that this is one of the lessons that millennials didn't learn. It's all about you. You're the one. You can create your own universe. That's a burden, John. That's too much to ask 17, 18-year-olds to do. They go to college, and a lot of them sort of drift and stumble, sometimes poorly. So this is really what was done to the millennials. And again, I would add, they don't read. They just don't read very much on their own. The Marianne Wolf book that you mentioned, Read or Come Home, I reviewed that book for the Claremont Review. And one of the things that she nicely points out as a neuroscientist is, I talked about the cognitive empathy factor when you read fiction. You've got to try to imagine yourself as those characters. In order to understand what's going on, you have to surmise what motives are, what those figures are experiencing. And John, that what she points out is this is actually reflected in neuroscience, where when they hook a brain up to all those electrodes and everything else to do the neural imaging, if you're reading about someone running real fast through a train station, a little part of your motor elements in the brain light up. It's not just an intellectual thing. You're imagining running, and your brain actually engages. in some of the imagined running. So we actually have scientific evidence. This is not just an idea, a thought about what happens when you read. It's a lot more of an investment. You're experiencing much more than just reading words on a page. So I think that not reading, not having the habit of fiction and poetry as well, you're missing some of the equipment that comes with that. Again, to handle disappointment, which is inevitable. There's a wisdom that comes with the humanities. Most very, very few passionate romances end well in Western civilization. They usually don't end well. There's a reason for that. I mentioned Narcissus. Narcissus is doomed from the start. He will only be able to fall in love with himself because everyone's in love with him. He's the only love object on earth. In his experience, everyone looks at me with love in their eyes. I'm so beautiful. Immediately, that's all that I see. So it creates this one-way experience of love. He can never fall in love until he leans over and sees his own reflection. And it's the first time he's ever seen himself. So he's seeing what everyone else sees, and he's going to feel what everyone else feels, and it kills him. There's a lesson. There's a moral instruction that goes with a lot of these Greek stories. Read them, learn from them. Read Aesop's fables to your 8-year-olds. Those explain a lot in very good, concise narrative form as well. They didn't get that. And so I think Gen Z is a little different. We'll see what happens with Gen Z. Gen Z was never told you're the greatest generation ever. Millennials were, and they bought it. They believed it. Gen Z doesn't talk about itself so much. Just my generation. We're the ones. We're so great. Millennials did because everyone else was talking about them. Well, it's not a good thing to do. And we're still climbing out of the self-involvements of these first waves of the digital catastrophe.
Great. Thank you for that, Dr. Bauerlein. And again, so much to say with that. I often say those who are inclined to just speaking to pop culture, those who are inclined to say, oh, the church, the mosque, the synagogue, the religion is tyrannical. For the sake of argument, okay, it's tyrannical, but don't tell me it's any more tyrannical than following your worldview from Instagram, or it's more tyrannical than following the herd. That's a tyranny much greater, and that's just a way I like to phrase that. But it is a great poverty. I think that's, in my opinion, the greatest poverty of modern pedagogy is this instruction of how the world is, but without answering why and asking even these bigger questions with an intention to answer them. That secularism is a great poverty. To Dr. Wolf's book, Read or Come Home, she makes a connection there between basically the atrophying of people's reading habits and their inability to grasp religious concepts, which are inherently abstract. And that I think to your book here, the dumbest generation and the dumbest generation grows up. I think you really elaborate on the fruits, or the rotten fruits of that. The fact that children, now men and women, Their brains are gobbledygook, and now we're coming to the point. Perhaps you'll have a second sequel to the original in a few years' time, and these ones are going to be traditionally maritable years. Maybe they're not getting married so much as you pointed out, but even beyond just the iPhone and the internet, this is a reality. I'm going to talk about piety in the true classical sense, not my blue-haired grandmother goes to her Bible meeting on Wednesday, that very individualistic idea of piety, but piety like Aeneas or Ulysses would know it, this idea of having obligations
Right.
to generations and culture, pious Aeneas. I have books, from the 60s and 70s where people are complaining that the so-called greatest generation had failed in their ability to transmit their values to their children. And this is obviously picking up tremendous steam at this point, that now it's truly the blind leading the blind. And this consciousness of piety that we're losing, piety in the sense of obligations to things you bring up in your book, and maybe you could speak to some of these points. Civic engagement, the ebbing away of civic engagement, the rise, something I'm very interested in, of the paranoia of people who have no cause for that, but the wicked, how does it say? The wicked flee, Proverbs, when none pursue. I mean, this is this is what we're in. People are suspicious about their next door neighbor. They all of this stuff. Yes, I'd like you to speak to this dynamic of the lack of the lack of obligations or piety, as I phrase it, that these devices, now that we really have this unfortunate momentum building up, how do you see this playing out, Doctor?
Well, I would point to many different causes. One of them, I would say, just the general progressivist schooling outlook of child-centered learning. The child-centered learning is something that downplays certainly the authority of the past, as well as the authority of the teacher as well. I mean, the cliches, no more sage on the stage, be a guide on the side. And I think that this undermines not only the authority of the teacher figure, but it gives the young a false conception of themselves. You're not able to manage your own learning, to take ownership, another phrase in ed school, of your own learning. We shouldn't have these open classrooms, all the desks arranged in these little stations where the kids look at each other. We need more regimentation in the classroom that maintains the authority of the teacher. And the thing is, John, this makes the kids feel more comfortable, more stable, more grounded. When you withhold your authority, when the culture, when the teachers, the intellectuals, the journalists, and others involved in the management of the young, when they withhold their authority out of some misguided notions of, I don't want to be tyrannical, I don't want to be dictatorial, I don't want to be authoritarian, you're telling the kids, you're on your own, guys. You figure it out for yourselves. You're taking away foundations, stability, roots. They don't know where they stand, and they feel lost. You've got to hand to the kids a past that has credibility. You've got to uphold role models, heroes and heroines, and who can stand for some ideals in some way. Even if the kids rebel against it, at least you're giving them something meaningful against which they can rebel. So what is the universe to them under this sort of youth-oriented, adolescent indulging culture and education? system, again, it's a meaningless place. Nothing guides them. I mean, I hope we're not going to say, influencers are proper guides, right? We don't want sports figures and Hollywood celebrities to be the ones who are offering behavioral models to the young, and they don't have any intellectual value, of course. So we did a very bad thing to the millennials. We handed them crappy TV shows and movies. We gave them packaged music and the rubbish that goes by the name of rap or hip hop. We didn't give them great works of art, of beauty. I mean, you look at the old cartoons. You mentioned Rocky and Bullwinkle. John, the old cartoons had a lot of classical music in them. And not only those famous Bugs Bunny episodes that parodied, Wagner opera, but just the soundtrack of cartoons had a lot of classical music. The old Hollywood film score creators like Max Steiner and Bernard Herrmann, classical music is all over the place. We didn't get these stupid rock and roll soundtracks really until the 80s. Those started to become very popular. And you do get the occasional film score that recalls classical music. I mean, the original Star Wars was all Wagner, right? Flying Dutchman and the others. You have some of those, but overall, we just give them pop culture, mass culture schmaltz, sentimental and again, low grade. So we didn't surround them with the best things. The curriculum doesn't make them do full works of Shakespeare, doesn't have them read romantic poetry, doesn't have them read American novels. Some do, but that's sort of the teacher's choice for the most part, except in these classical schools where we see a great counterculture thriving, but it's still a small segment of things. So it's our fault. It's my boomer generation's fault. The 60s was all about youth culture, right? Talking about my generation. Well, what's going to happen to those boomers when those youths and when they're young? Well, now you're old. And they're so nervous about exercising the authority of being an elder that when I wrote that first Dumbest Generation book, I had tons of meetings, talks I gave, discussions, where it was very clear a lot of people in the U.S., they just didn't like anyone criticizing young people. That's what really bothered. Even if they knew I was right, let's not say that. Don't be just a grumpy old man. They complained about Elvis and they complained about comic books, and you're just another one of those curmudgeons. And my response was two things. One, I say, that's my job. Older people are supposed to criticize young people. Smarten up, I wish I had someone telling me that when I was 17, 18 years old, a little more firmly. But the other thing is, wait a minute. You guys have been talking about this digital age as a revolution. I mean, on the order of the printing press or the invention of writing even. And when someone comes along and says, whoa, this revolution is going to have far-reaching effects and some of them are going to be very bad, then you're saying, hey, come on, lighten up. It's just a little screen. Comic books, Elvis Presley. Now TikTok. Well, you guys, you're playing a double game here, and you're flat wrong. And you mentioned, the decline of intelligence. Reading scores have fallen hugely. The tests of aptitude have gone down. In fact, There are studies now of problem solving and critical thinking now. It's deteriorating. It's deteriorating for obvious reasons. You think all those hours watching TikTok videos, which, by the way, are very addictive. They're designed to be addictive. Silicon Valley hired psychologists, experts in attention, as they called it. Let's call it addiction, because the longer they stick eyes on that little screen, the more money they make. So of course, this was going to damage the intelligence of the young. If you surround yourself with inane performances, 3 hours a day, or video games, you get on Fortnite for hours, or whatever the latest thing is, for hours on end, your mind is going to it's not going to deteriorate. It's not going to develop the way it does if you're reading Edgar Allan Poe short stories, or even if you're reading, detective novels, fun genre kinds of stuff. A big difference in the vocabulary you acquire, the cognitive empathy that develops, and often just the knowledge that comes with reading, the general background knowledge of things.
As a man in journalism yourself, you might be familiar with a publication from upstate New York, Catholic journalism, no less, Catholic Family News. And I had the occasion of meeting a couple of times John Venari, Lord have mercy on him. But when the Common Core was rolling out, to some of your initial comments, Doctor, John Venari had a whole series on this Obama education. And I'll never forget, he pointed out, analyzing within this system, the teaching of Frankenstein, Shelley's Frankenstein. And he said, look at this. And he breaking down the curriculum in New York, they watch Young Frankenstein, they do a skit on Frankenstein, they read a story of Frankenstein from the monster's point of view. But he said, at the end of the day, after this unit, they've never read Frankenstein. They've never actually read the text. They've had all this, foolish secondary stuff. And where I'm going with that is something that's striking me more and more, and I think it's striking other people. I suspect in your text, I get the same sentiment. Even this is a few years published, and I think this will be growing more and more. Is that this cell phone and the digital thing? I'm just using it as a centerpiece. It is really the elephant in the room, and I certainly have come to this appraisal in the past couple months. Right now, is that this dynamic of the digital disruption is so much bigger than the fights, so to speak, between alternative education, homeschool, and the critique of the academy, and then the mainstream education. What is rising is so much bigger. It's going to make our previous disagreements, let's say those of us in alternative education or who might be critical of the mainstream, seem paltry. What is rising, and maybe as the final point we can really elaborate on here, is agency. The idea of the individual taking responsibility for his education, his role in the polis, so to speak, his role in life. That I think the lack of agency, because I was very involved in things like unschooling at a certain point in my life, and very warm to a lot of those child-centered learning and so forth. And I think what was motivating me all those years ago, and I think what motivates a lot of people in that neck of the woods, is the fear of lacking agency or total conformity or whatnot. And yet, having now worked with homeschoolers and people on the educational margins for 20 years, I'm really seeing that it is this digital aspect is creating it is creating such lethargy even amongst people who think they, are trying to address problems, I see it in the students themselves. They're just as passive. There is something about the passivity of the digital engagement that is so much more powerful than whatever alternatives we're trying to throw up. So my final point to throw your way, Doctor, is what are we to do at this hour? We see this this problem of passivity. How do we encourage agency, particularly in learning? That's my final thing for hopefully what will be future conversations.
Well, I would say we got to get the kids away from screens. Screens discourage agency, and all this talk about oh no, they're interactive and video games and so on. No, what I mean by agency is when you're not handed something that you get involved in, that you go outside and you meet some kids and you go think of some things to do, right? You might want to go exploring in the woods or nature. You might want to go find a place to shoot baskets, or just where you have to come up with something in your life to do. It's not spoon-fed to you, where you sit in a chair. I've got that phone and I can just scroll for hours, and you're not doing anything. You're just absorbing. You're just sitting there as a consumer of stuff, of sights and sounds and stupid images. So the disengaging from the screen, from the youth activities there is so crucial. And this is, I think it's happening, John. I mean, people now, 15 years ago, if I said, this cell phone is Satan's prime instrument on planet Earth, people would say, you're a nut. They don't say that now. They know the damage that has been done to the young through these iPhones. This is why New Hampshire just banned cell phones in schools. Georgia has banned cell phones in schools. Arkansas has banned them. Los Angeles, New York City, more and more places are actually doing an outright ban on the phone in schools. Now, John, this crosses political lines. This is not a right or a left thing. It was a right-wing thing. It was a conservative thing 10, 15 years ago, and it was a minor thing. Now, nope, the left is on this too. I mean, the left is in favor of this because they understand the cell phone is really just a corporate invention designed to turn people into mindless consumers. The right does it because it sees spiritual and emotional damage being done, especially given the content passing through these phones. I mean, guys and girls don't go out and date. They don't have courtships like they used to. Guys stay home. They've got their video games and their sports and their buddies and their porn. And girls they study hard. They do better in school than boys do, and they sit around and complain about how there are no good guys around. This is where, and that's an agent. That's a passivity thing going on. So the agency is it serves the interests of Silicon Valley in the way that, sitting in front of a TV for hours, people complained about back in the 60s and 70s, the way, couch potatoes, same thing. So I think the first thing, it is going on, more and more parents are realize that a phone for an 11-year-old is a horrible idea. I think 10, 15 years from now, we may see a phone in the hands of a 10-year-old is almost as bad as a cigarette in the hands of a 10-year-old. Because when you compare where we were 10 years ago to now, the meaning, the nature of the phone is completely different. When we're talking about the young, we're all tied to the phones. We all use them for work and planning and organization of our lives now. but we know it's not a good thing. We need it, but boy, if it isn't strictly contained, it can take over. And John, you've seen kids, they are addicted. They're genuinely addicted. When you take the phone away, they undergo withdrawal symptoms. That's a sign of a lack of agency, right? They are dependent on the phones for happiness. It's a security blanket for them. And that means it's got to be taken away. So I've been supporting all those cell phone bans, trying to get, a lot of the standards, the educational standards will have standards on media literacy in them. I said, no, don't have any media, anything in here. In fact, the best way to teach media literacy is to have them read Shakespeare and act it out, right? Is, have them read Walt Whitman's verse, have them read Frederick Douglass's narrative. That'll teach more of a critical sensibility when they approach media than any lessons in media literacy directly will do. Introduce people to the intelligent, the brilliant, the eloquent, right? The beautiful, the sublime. They will carry with them for the rest of their lives. So read to your children every night in bed. Read to them even after they've learned to read themselves. Continue reading more sophisticated things with them when they go to bed at night. Make them know books, and they love books. Kids love books. They love the big picture books when they're 3 years old. I used to read those big Richard Scarry books to my son that had all those funny pictures, and I would say, "Oh, where's Goldbug?" And he'd look until he could point to where Goldbug was. All these little games give kids the love of the printed page. Actually, they already do love the printed page. And by the way, in surveys that I've seen, kids prefer a real book to a book on a tablet. They like the material object. They like the process of turning the pages or turning back in the pages, going slow, looking at the pictures. So that would be my fundamental advice to parents on this. Read to your kids for 1 solid hour every night.
Great, thank you for that. And just a few closing thoughts on my end, and then I'd like to ask you, Doctor, where we can find your different books and so forth. Of course, we have your Twitter page. I trust I won't be shot by the Mr. Musk for still calling it Twitter, X these days, whatever. Just a few points I had on a spiritual note. I pulled my copy of the Vatican II documents, and what's interesting is, there's a certain gentle enough tone of voice for most of the documents. But if one reads the Intermerifica, which is on modern communications, it's and I have in this volume, they have like 10 years of the follow-up documents and kind of the minor addendums and so forth. If you read that whole chain of text, Intermerifica is the only time I've found where the Council Fathers and then the scholars after them in the different dicasteries are much more, shall we say, old-fashioned or much more gritty and a little bit forceful in terms of the beauties of modern communication, but also the dangers and the obligations those who have. You mentioned, some of these bans, and frankly, the running amok that Silicon Valley has been allowed to do by the civil so-called leaders have allowed them to do these past 15 years is remarkably irresponsible. And I would encourage people, if they're interested, to read that, regardless of their religious tradition. There's a lot of wisdom in Intermerifica there, and one will detect a much older type of tone of voice, a much sterner one, I should say.
Yeah. Well, look, this was starting with the advent of television, right, in the 50s, kids just sitting, plunking in front of the TV and not going outside. It really expanded in the 80s with cable TV, when we went from 5 channels to 30 or 40 channels. And then all these teen shows popped up as well. And then the satellite, were thousands of channels, and the internet and everything else. And it is, there's a movement to go out and play. Free range kids. You don't need to be on the digital leash at all times. This, you would say, is a concoction of the marketers at Silicon Valley. Why are you pouring money into these people's pockets? So the final thing that I would say is there are old-fashioned models. Yes, turn back the clock. Take your kids out of schools that don't understand this, if you can. Homeschool them. Go, try to start a little school group with other parents. Bond with other parents over eliminating the cell phone from the kids' lives as much as you can. And the more you can make this a group thing, right, the better. The more your kids play with other kids who don't have cell phones, the better. So parents there's a lot of movement right now of resistance, a lot of recognition out there. And I mean, I did some of the ELA standards for the state of Georgia. Georgia now has kids learning cursive. Okay, so let's bring back the cursive into all the schools. But there are places where people can go now, parents who don't like what's happening with the digital advent that didn't exist 10 years ago. There's a lot of commonality now among people worried about that, and they don't want their kids to be absorbed by all the garbage.
Well, so many things to say there, Dr. Mark Bauerlein, and I should hope we can carry on with these points. But you've been very, very generous with your time thus far, and I don't want to hold you up at all. Where can we buy your book and your books, plural, and perhaps any articles you have or websites you would like to share with us?
I don't have my own website, but Amazon is always there. By the way, when you buy books on Amazon, there are independent booksellers that sell through Amazon. You can get new versions of books sold by independents. Amazon gets a little cut, as they should. But try to go to the independent bookseller whenever you can. You can often find good deals that they have on things. So that's the main place. And then firstthings.com is where I have some articles, and I do a podcast for First Things every week, focused on recent books with the authors. So I'll be happy to welcome any of your audience to some of those conversations.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bauerlein. And no doubt people will check those points out. And then when they've digested all of your writing and your podcast, they can shimmy over to ApocatastasIs and enroll in our stuff and take their humanities journey and continue that down the way. But Dr. Mark, thank you very much for your time here.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.